The morning began with silence so sharp it sounded like truth waiting to speak. Asha Carter stopped at the cemetery gate. The ground still glistened with dew, the grass wet under a weak sun. Then she saw them, 15 men in dark suits kneeling in 2 rows before her mother's grave. Their polished shoes sank into the soft earth, their heads bowed, their breath steaming in the chill air. Between their hands lay a straight line of white roses. Each bloom had a small paper tag tied to the stem, moving slightly in the breeze. Asha froze. She had come before work, dressed in her diner uniform and denim jacket, to clean the headstone and whisper a prayer. She expected quiet, maybe a robin hopping near the flowers she always brought. Not this, her eyes narrowed. These men did not belong here. Their posture was too deliberate, their silence too heavy. And then she saw him, at the center of the line, Robert Vale, Billionaire CEO. The face she had seen on screens at the gas station TV. He was kneeling on the same ground where her mother rested. Asha stepped forward. The gravel under her shoes cracked the quiet. The men did not turn. They stayed bent, a wall of stillness in dark fabric. Vale's eyes lifted, meeting hers for only a second. Behind the glass of his expression, she saw something she had never expected to see on the face of power. Remorse. "Excuse me," she said. "What is this?" Her voice carried over the headstones. Vale didn't speak right away. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a pen and wrote something on the tag of his rose. Then he placed it carefully at the base of the grave. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "A debt," he said. Asha stared. "To my mother?" "To Dr. Miriam Carter," he said, using the title no one used anymore. The sound of her mother's name spoken like that, the weight of it, hit her harder than the morning cold. Each man rose one by one, brushed the dirt from his trousers, and placed his rose beside the others. A line of pale petals now framed the grave like an oath. Asha looked closer. The tags carried dates: June 3, 2002, August 17, 2002, October 4, 2002 each, one from the year her mother had lost her job at Vale Industries. Her pulse quickened. Those were the months her mother came home quiet, her hands smelling faintly of chemicals, her eyes distant. Asha's breath trembled. "Why are you doing this now?" Vale met her eyes again. "Because time doesn't cancel debt." The men turned and walked toward their cars waiting at the edge of the cemetery. Their black coats moved like a single dark wave against the lightening sky. When the last door closed, only the roses remained. 15 flowers, 15 dates. Asha knelt where they had stood. The ground was damp. She brushed her fingers over the tags. The ink had not yet dried. On Vale's tag, the date read April 12, 2002. She didn't know why that mattered, but something in her gut told her it did. She lifted her phone, not to share, but to remember. The lens caught the pale roses, the morning mist, the grave that now looked like a ledger. She took one photo, then another. The shutter sounded too loud, like a secret breaking open. She posted it with a single caption: 15 men in suits, one grave, my mother's name. Within hours, the image spread across the world. Reposted, debated, dissected. The billionaire on his knees, the unknown woman in the diner uniform, the grave between them. By sunset, the quiet life of Asha Carter was over. The coffee pot hissed like an engine refusing to quit. Asha Carter wiped the counter of the roadside diner, the same one that caught the morning crowd from exit 17. Truckers, salesmen, night shift nurses, people who lived in motion. She stayed. The bell over the door rang every few minutes, a tired rhythm she could measure her life by. The walls smelled faintly of grease and burnt toast. The neon clock above the register blinked half-lit numbers, always a few minutes slow. Asha moved between tables with calm precision. She knew every regular by name, every tip by weight. Her apron pockets carried coins, receipts, and a folded photo of her mother, Miriam. Miriam Carter had once worn a lab coat at Vale Industries, not a diner uniform. Asha used to brag that her mother worked with science, though she had never really understood what that meant. All she knew was that one spring, her mother came home silent, carrying a cardboard box of papers instead of her badge. The next day, she burned the papers in a metal bin and told Asha, "Some truths hurt too early." Asha had been 16 then. She dropped out of community college to take care of her mother when the illness came. An illness that never found a clear name, only symptoms that drained strength quietly. Now at 28, she still moved with the careful patience of someone who had learned to serve before speaking. The customers liked her steadiness. The owner, Mr. Fields, said she gave the place a moral backbone. But that morning, after the photo of the kneeling men went viral, the diner no longer felt invisible. Reporters parked outside. The neon sign flickered over their camera lenses. "Hey, Asha, that's you on the news, isn't it?" A truck driver asked, holding up his phone. She managed a small nod. "Yeah, that's my mom's grave." The man frowned. "Those were Vale's people." "What's a billionaire doing there?" "I wish I knew," she said. The conversation died under the hum of the coffee machine. Asha's hands kept working, but her thoughts drifted to the photo. 15 men kneeling, roses lined like confession. The world called it a corporate apology, or a publicity stunt. But to her, it felt like unfinished math. Something was missing. Through the window, she could see Vale Tower on the horizon, its glass surface reflecting sunlight like a blade. It looked almost unreal from here, a place built by people who never stopped to eat at exit 17. Diner plates clinked. Someone asked for extra syrup. Life tried to resume its normal beat, but Asha couldn't unsee the image or the man's face. Robert Vale, whispering over her mother's name as if asking the dead for mercy. The lunch crowd thinned. Asha refilled the sugar jars, wiped down the booth where her mother once sat watching her work. She reached for her apron pocket, meaning to touch the old photo of Miriam. Instead, her fingers brushed something new, an envelope, no stamp, no name, just her own handwriting copied on the front. Her pulse quickened. She looked around, but the last customer was gone. The highway outside hummed low. She slid a nail under the flap. Inside was a single photograph, her mother in a white lab coat standing in a Vale Industries laboratory. Behind her, tanks and wires filled the frame. Miriam's face was calm, her eyes fixed on something out of sight. On the back of the photo, 4 words in neat black ink. "Truth waits." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Asha held the picture tight, the smell of coffee mixing with the sudden chill that ran through her. The diner clock ticked, a few minutes slow as always, counting down to something she could now feel approaching. The first clue hid in plain sight, a missing page number. Emma Torres noticed it while scrolling through Vale Industries' old reports at the county archive. Every file from 2002 was neat, labeled, logged. Every test result had initials beside it. Except one, Project Clearwell, Water Quality Study. The table of contents jumped from page 212 to 214. She leaned closer to the screen. A single gap, small enough to overlook, large enough to mean something. Emma had covered corruption before, but this felt different. The report carried Dr. Miriam Carter's name, a scientist whose file ended abruptly the same year she disappeared from the company's records. Emma underlined it in her notebook. 2002 terminated, no cause listed. The archivist passed by and said, "Old stuff. They digitized it years ago. Some things never made the transfer." Emma gave a thin smile. "That's what they always say." She took a photo of the gap and leaned back. In investigative work, silence often said more than sound. Outside, the afternoon light burned through clouds, washing the parking lot in white glare. Emma dialed her editor. "You remember that viral photo? The billionaire kneeling at a grave. Hard to miss, why?" "I think I know who the woman was and why he's sorry." She drove south toward the old Vale plant. The factory gates were locked, the sign faded. Grass grew through cracks in the concrete. Yet the smell lingered, a metallic tang carried by wind. Locals still called the place the plant. They said the river never tasted right after 2002. Some called it contamination. Others called it curse. Emma stopped by the diner at exit 17. Asha Carter recognized her from the news. "You're the reporter," she said, "and you're the daughter." They sat by the window, light sliding across the table between them. Emma placed a folder down. Inside were photocopies of old reports, each stamped confidential. "Your mother worked on water filtration," Emma said. She warned them something was wrong with the chemical runoff from the plant. It reached the neighborhood's well system. Mostly black families, She wrote about it in her lab notebook. Asha's eyes narrowed. I remember that book. Brown cover, thick paper. She never let it out of her sight. Emma opened a photograph. An image of the notebook recovered from Vale's archive. The last pages were torn clean out. They said she was dismissed for protocol errors. Emma continued. But there's no record of any review. No memo, no replacement scientist. It's as if she never existed. Asha touched the edge of the photo, tracing the tear marks with her thumb. She kept saying the water could speak if anyone listened. She was right, Emma said. The same toxins she flagged are in the soil reports from last year. The evidence was never destroyed, only buried under time and money. The waitress looked toward the window where Vale Tower shimmered in the far distance. The reflection of the afternoon sun made it look almost weightless, as if truth itself had to climb to reach that height. Emma's voice softened. Asha, your mother didn't lose her job. She was erased. The words settled like dust after a blast, quiet but impossible to ignore. The screen froze on his own face, kneeling in the mud. Robert. Vale stood before the wall-sized television in his penthouse high above the city. The footage looped silently. 15 men in black suits, heads bowed before a single grave. The image had circled the world in less than an hour. News anchors called it the Billionaire's confession. Social feeds called it performance remorse. He turned down the volume, but the silence was louder. Outside the glass, night spread over towers like ink over glass. Inside, everything gleamed. Polished marble, still water in a stone fountain. Art chosen for its price, not its meaning. Yet the room felt airless, as if truth had found its way in and refused to leave. On his desk lay a single object, a pair of silver cufflinks engraved with the Vale Industries emblem, a rising V over rippling lines meant to symbolize progress. The same logo that had once stamped every drum of chemical waste shipped out under Project Clearwell. Vale picked up one cufflink, turning it in the light. The reflection trembled against his fingers. He remembered the day Miriam Carter stood in his office, her lab coat still damp from the field, speaking faster than fear allowed. Sir, the filtration data is wrong. The runoff is poisoning the groundwater. We have to stop distribution now. He had nodded, pretended to listen, then sent a quiet message to legal. Contain exposure. End her contract. It was efficient. It was loyal to shareholders. It was wrong. He placed the cufflink down. The engraved lines seemed sharper now, like cuts. A knock at the door pulled him back. His assistant entered cautious. Sir, the board wants to release a statement. They're concerned about optics. Vale's eyes stayed on the frozen image of the grave. Optics, he repeated. That's the word we used back then, too. The assistant hesitated. Should I tell them you'll draft something? He nodded and the door closed. For a long moment he simply stood there, surrounded by the empire he built on silence. Every window showed a reflection of his own face. Every light hum reminded him of the water filters, the factories, the promises sold as progress. On the television, the camera panned closer to the grave. White roses, 15 of them. Each tagged with a date. The first, April 12th, 2002, the last, December 19th, 2002. He knew those dates. They were meeting days, signatures, approvals. Every rose marked an order given. Every man who had obeyed. One of them had called it protecting innovation. Another called it acceptable loss. But he remembered Miriam's eyes when she realized her findings would be buried. They had held no anger, only disbelief, as if she had mistaken the company for something human. Vale poured a glass of water from the crystal decanter and stared at it. Clear, perfect, worthless. He set it down untouched. He walked to the window. Far below, the city pulsed with light, buildings shining like circuits, each one connected to his name. He saw the reflection of the cufflinks still on the desk behind him, the symbols of his power and his ruin. He thought of Miriam's daughter, the waitress who had taken the photograph that exposed him. Her face had appeared in every news article, always framed as the girl who forced a billionaire to his knees. But he had knelt willingly. Not to her, but to the memory of the woman whose truth he had buried. He returned to his desk, opened a new document on his screen. The cursor blinked. He wrote the first line slowly. This company owes a debt that cannot be paid in money. He stopped, exhaled, then reached for his phone. Call the others, he said. Every executive from 2002. Tell them I'm done hiding. There was silence on the line. Then, sir, what should I tell them it's about? Vale looked again at the cufflinks, the tiny V carved like a scar. He removed them and set them beside the glass of water. Tell them it's about presence, he said quietly. Debt demands presence. And for the first time in 20 years, Robert Vale began to write the truth. The lights flashed like judgment. Robert Vale stepped up to the podium, face pale against a wall of cameras. The room, packed with reporters, investors, and company staff, hummed like a hive before a storm. The Vale Industries logo stood behind him, tall and bright, a monument of blue steel letters. He adjusted the microphone. His cufflinks were gone. His tie was plain. His voice, when it came, was careful and low. I have spent years believing that progress excused mistakes, he began. But there are errors so deep they stain the ground beneath us. I speak today to acknowledge moral crimes committed under my watch. The crowd shifted. Lenses clicked. His words spread through every live feed in seconds. Vale continued. Our company's past actions harmed communities and silenced truth. To make amends, Vale Industries is creating the Clearwell Restitution Fund, dedicated to rebuilding affected neighborhoods and supporting clean water initiatives. This is not charity. It is responsibility. Applause erupted. The sound filled the room, loud, polished, professional. Executives nodded. Journalists tweeted phrases like historic admission and unprecedented corporate accountability. But behind the applause, Asha Carter stood in the last row, motionless. She heard everything except what mattered. Her mother's name, Miriam Carter, was never spoken. Asha's hands tightened around the photograph she carried in her bag, Miriam in her lab coat, the one marked Truth Waits. Vale raised his head. We cannot undo the past, he said, but we can ensure its lessons guide our future. The applause came again, louder this time, as if sound could erase guilt. The cameras loved him, the billionaire reborn, humble before the world. But Asha saw something else in his posture. Control. Every word timed, every gesture shaped to comfort, not to convict. After the conference, reporters swarmed the exits. Asha slipped through a side hall, following a man who looked like Vale's security aide. The corridor led to a private green room, soft lights, bottled water, and the CEO himself sitting alone, head bowed in thought. Mr. Vale, she said. He looked up slowly. Their eyes met. The waitress from exit 17 and the man who owned the sky. You didn't say her name, Asha said. Vale studied her face. Names become symbols. Symbols can divide. She was a person, Asha said, voice steady. A scientist. You erased her, he exhaled. I never erased her. I buried her truth because I was afraid of losing what we built. What you built, she said, poisoned a town. Vale rose, tired but calm. Do you think I don't know that? Do you think the kneeling was for spectacle? Every man there signed the orders that silenced her. They know. I know. Then say it, she said, stepping closer. Say her name, he hesitated. The silence between them felt heavier than all the applause outside. She warned me about the water, he said finally, his voice breaking on the last word. She told me it would carry our guilt downstream. Asha stared at him. And now it has. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the cameras beyond the door sounded distant, almost unreal. Vale turned away, resting one hand on the table. You think justice is noise, he said quietly. Sometimes it's endurance. Asha took the photo from her bag and placed it on the table beside him. Then endure this, she said. She left without waiting for his reply. Outside, the applause had ended. Reporters hurried to send headlines. Vale admits moral crimes. Corporate redemption begins. But Asha walked into the sunlight with only one thought echoing in her mind. The words he had spoken like a confession and a curse. She warned me about the water. The water looked clean. But it lied. Asha Carter stood at the edge of the old neighborhood once called Clearwell Heights. The sun fell flat across empty houses, roofs caved, windows clouded with dust. Lawns had turned to brittle weeds. No children played, no dogs barked. Only the faint smell of rust drifted from the river. She bent near a ditch that ran behind the houses. The water shimmered clear as glass, moving slow, silent. She cupped her hand and lifted it. It smelled sharp, metallic, bitter. The kind of smell that stayed in memory more than in air. She remembered her mother standing just here, years ago. The white lab coat rolled at the sleeves, a small glass vial in hand. "If it's clean," Miriam had said, "it shouldn't fight the nose." Asha had been a teenager then, watching from the car. Her mother had filled 10 vials, labeled them, sealed them. She looked proud, certain that truth was a kind of armor. That night she sent her report to Vale Industries. By morning she was removed from her post. Now the town was gone. The people who could leave had left. Those who couldn't were still fighting invisible damage. A few stayed behind in quiet protest. Elders who refused to abandon their homes. Asha met one of them, a woman named Mrs. Laverne, sitting on her porch with a hand fan and a worn scarf. "You're her daughter, aren't you?" the woman asked softly. "The doctor who warned them," Asha nodded. "She came here often," Mrs. Laverne said. "Said the truth was in the samples. We tried to believe her, but no one listened. The kids got sick, the wells dried, and then they fenced it off. That's what they do, fence things off and call it safety." The wind carried the faint hum of the highway miles away. Asha looked at the cracked sign by the road. Clearwell Heights, a future in progress. The letters peeled like old skin. She knelt and filled a small glass she had brought, the same kind her mother used to test. The liquid sparkled, innocent under the sun, but when Asha lifted it closer, that metallic scent returned, truth pretending to be purity. She carried it carefully back to her car. On the seat lay her mother's photo and the letter from Emma Torres. Evidence recovered. Truth will need witnesses. The drive to the cemetery was silent. Each turn of the road felt like a memory rewound. Her mother coughing at night, whispering about reports she never finished. The company she still hoped would do the right thing. At the grave, Asha set down the glass of water beside the roses the men had left. It caught the sunlight, throwing a weak reflection across the carved name, Dr. Miriam Carter. She knelt. "They called it Clearwell," she said. "But it's poison. And now the world's going to hear it from me." The wind stirred. The glass trembled, a faint ripple across the surface like breath. Asha stood, eyes steady. "You warned them about the water," she whispered. "Now it's going to speak." She turned and walked away, the single glass gleaming behind her, a quiet promise that truth, once uncovered, could never be buried again. The elevator stopped with a sound like metal, remembering its own weight. Asha Carter and journalist Emma Torres stepped into the underground floor of Vale Industries. The air was colder here, filtered, dry, almost sterile. Lights buzzed in long silver rows, stretching down a corridor that smelled faintly of paper and dust. "This is it," Emma whispered. The archive. Ahead stood a heavy door with a security pad glowing red. The label read Records Retention, Level 3. Emma pulled a small card from her pocket. "From a friend in compliance," she said. The scanner beeped green. The door opened with a sigh, like the building itself exhaling secrets. Inside, the temperature dropped again. Rows of steel shelves lined the room, each stacked with gray boxes marked with years and project codes. Everything about the place was efficient, controlled, clean, impersonal. Asha walked slowly, tracing the labels with her finger. Energy studies, safety trials, internal audits. Then one caught her eye. Project Clearwell, 2002. Her heart thudded. The box was sealed with company tape. The edges were sharp, untouched for decades. Emma took out a small blade and sliced through the seal. The sound was soft but final. Inside were folders wrapped in plastic, brittle from time. Emma lifted one carefully. The first page read, Water Contamination Analysis, Dr. Miriam Carter. Asha's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Her mother's handwriting filled the margins, tight, neat, certain. Notes about pH levels, filtration failures, and toxin readings. In one corner, a simple line. If they ignore this, the ground will carry our guilt. God, Emma murmured. She knew everything. There were photos, too. Children standing by a river, water tanks, soil samples tagged with coordinates. Each page built a story of truth buried under official silence. Asha reached deeper into the box and found a smaller envelope, yellowed with age. The handwriting on the front was her mother's. To whomever still cares, she opened it. Inside was a letter, written in blue ink. If you are reading this, I failed to protect what matters. I warned them the water was not safe. They told me progress required sacrifice. I hope one day someone will believe the numbers when the people were not believed. Truth will wait, but it will not die. Asha pressed the paper to her chest. For a moment, she could almost hear her mother's voice again, the calm tone she used when explaining science, the quiet conviction that facts could save lives. Emma snapped photos of every page. We can prove everything, she said. Every lie they told, every signature. But before Asha could answer, a sharp alarm sliced through the quiet. Red lights began to flash along the ceiling. Motion sensors, Emma said, eyes wide. We tripped one. Footsteps echoed down the hall, heavy, measured. Asha grabbed the letter, clutching it close. The door swung open and Robert Vale stepped in, flanked by 2 guards who stayed at the threshold. For a second, no one moved. The CEO looked older than before, his face drawn, his eyes reflecting the red alarm light like warning signals of their own. Emma stood firm. You can't hide this again. Vale raised a hand. I'm not here to stop you. He stepped forward, gaze fixed on the open box. I came to finish what she started. Asha's voice broke the silence. You knew about this. I signed every page, he said quietly. And I buried every one of them. He looked at the letter still in her hand. She told me the truth would wait. I think it waited long enough. The alarms kept blaring, but no one moved to leave. The cold metal shelves surrounded them. Yet for the first time, the room felt almost human, alive with consequence. Vale reached for the box. Come with me, he said. Let's bring it upstairs. And as they followed him toward the elevator, the red lights flashing across the archives looked less like danger now, and more like the color of something being born. The pen trembled before the paper like a final test of courage. Robert Vale sat in the center of the conference room that once ruled the company. The same table where silence had been bought and truth postponed, now held only one document. 40 pages stamped, confidential release. Across the top, in bold type, Project Clearwell, declassification order. Asha Carter stood at the far end, her mother's letter folded in her hand. The fluorescent lights hummed, steady and cold. Emma Torres stood beside her, camera off, notebook closed. Tonight was not for headlines. It was for reckoning. Vale looked thinner, his suit hanging loose, his breath shallow. I built an empire on denial, he said quietly. But empires are fragile things. They collapse the moment truth walks in. He reached for the pen. The metal clicked once, a sound sharper than any word spoken in the room. He began to sign. Each stroke of ink felt deliberate, heavy, irreversible. The legal officer beside him called in under emergency order, watched in silence. Her pen never moved. There was nothing left to negotiate. With every signature, Vale read the line aloud. I, Robert Vale, authorize the full release of internal files related to Project Clearwell, Dr. Miriam Carter, and associated suppression orders. By the time he reached the last page, his voice broke on her name. He set the pen down, hands trembling. The document lay between them, no longer a corporate artifact, but something closer to prayer. Asha stepped forward. Why now? She asked. Vale looked up. Because guilt is louder than applause. He pushed the papers toward her. These belong to the world now. She glanced at the signatures, dozens of them written in ink that still glistened under the light. Every name represented a man who had once knelt at her mother's grave. You think this fixes it? She asked. No, Vale said. It acknowledges it. He stood slowly, leaning on the edge of the table for balance. Your mother was the conscience we buried. I won't die her debtor. Asha's throat tightened. For a moment she saw not a billionaire, not a symbol of greed, but a man exhausted by the weight of his own history. He stepped around the table. The marble floor reflected the overhead light, bright and unforgiving. Vale moved to her, unsteady but sure, and then, without hesitation, he knelt. There were no cameras this time. No applause, no flash, just the quiet sound of fabric brushing stone. I can't undo what I did, he said, but I can meet truth where it waits. Asha looked down at him, the man who had erased her mother now asking to stand in her shadow. She placed the letter on the table beside the signed confession. The 2 papers, one written in faith, the other in repentance, seemed to balance each other, as if the past and the present had finally agreed to meet. Vale's breathing grew uneven. He pressed a hand to his chest but stayed kneeling. Emma moved forward. "Mr. Vale," he shook his head. "Let it be," he whispered. "It's enough." The room fell silent. The hum of the lights became a heartbeat. Then Vale's body sagged forward, one hand still resting on the table beside the document. Asha knelt beside him, steady but calm. "You did one thing right," she said. Outside, the city lights flickered as breaking news alerts began to spread. Vale Industries declassifies toxic water files. CEO collapses after signing. From every screen, the image appeared, the confession signed in ink and trembling hands. By dawn, the world would know her mother's name. And for the first time in 20 years, truth would stand without apology. The truth finally had a room to speak. Morning light poured through the tall windows of the federal courthouse, painting clean lines across the polished floor. Reporters filled every bench, their cameras lowered for once. No shouting, no flashes, just waiting. At the center of it all sat Asha Carter. Her hands rested flat on the wooden table, palms steady. The nameplate before her read, "Miriam Carter Memorial Hearing on Public Record." It had taken 20 years to reach this moment. 20 years since the report was buried, the town poisoned and her mother erased. Now, because of the files Vale signed before his collapse, the world was listening. The panel of officials leaned forward. "Ms. Carter," the chairwoman said, "you may begin." Asha rose. Her voice was calm, firm, clear enough for every microphone. "My mother believed science was a promise, not a business. She found toxins in the water Vale Industries produced. She reported them. For that, she lost her career, her health, and her voice. But she left behind her notes and her warning. She lifted the same letter that once began with, 'To whomever still cares.'" The courtroom seemed to lean closer. "She wrote that truth will wait, but it will not die," Asha said. "Today it stops waiting." Her words landed softly, but their weight filled the room. She told them about the abandoned houses of Clearwell Heights, about the families who drank poison, thinking it was progress. She spoke of the white roses left at the grave, the confession Vale had signed before his heart gave out. And finally, she said the line her mother had repeated like a lesson, "Water carries everything we put in it. Truth, too." The panel listened in silence. Some took notes. Some couldn't. When Asha finished, the chairwoman cleared her throat. "Thank you, Ms. Carter. The restitution fund will be expanded to include a permanent scholarship in your mother's name." Asha nodded once. She didn't smile. "It's not about money," she said quietly. "It's about memory." The cameras clicked again, but differently now, gentler, almost reverent. The sound of paper shuffled, gavel struck. The hearing adjourned. As she gathered her things, a young intern approached. "That last thing you said, what was it again?" Asha paused. "Redemption begins where silence ends." He wrote it down like a headline. She walked toward the exit. The marble floors echoed under her steps. Reporters called her name, but she didn't stop. Outside, the doors opened to a wide wash of sunlight. For a long moment, she just stood there, blinking against the brightness. The courthouse loomed behind her, a monument to what truth costs when delayed. Ahead lay the city, restless, alive, unaware of the quiet victory that had just unfolded. Asha took a breath of clean air. No applause, no speech, only light. She looked down at her mother's letter one last time, folded it carefully, and slipped it into her bag. The words inside no longer felt like a warning. They felt like release. Then she stepped into the sunlight. Quiet. Not triumphant. The graveyard was quiet except for the wind moving through dry leaves. Soft. Almost like breath. Asha Carter walked the familiar path, a single bouquet in her hand. A year had passed since the hearings, since the headlines faded, since the world decided to move on. But some truths didn't move on. They waited, patient as stone. The grave came into view, Dr. Miriam Carter. The name still caught the light as if refusing to fade. Around it lay the remains of the 15 roses, once placed by powerful men on their knees. 14 were now brown and brittle, their petals curled inward, color drained to the tone of parchment. But one, just one, stood upright and fresh, a white rose. Its stem still green, dew clinging to its petals. Asha stopped. She hadn't brought it. She crouched and brushed a leaf from the base of the headstone. The tag tied to the rose's stem carried a new date, April 12th, 2025, the anniversary of the first one Robert Vale had placed. Her chest tightened. She looked around the quiet yard, half expecting a shadow among the trees. But there was only sunlight and the hum of insects. Asha traced the engraved letters on the stone, the same way she used to trace her mother's hand when she was small. "You were right," she whispered. "Truth doesn't die. It just waits for courage." She placed her bouquet beside the lone white rose. The air smelled of grass and rain. In her mind, she replayed everything that had followed. The fund renamed in her mother's honor, the scholarship for young scientists, the river cleanup crews wearing patches that read, "Project Clearwell, restored." The world had changed piece by piece, but she knew what it had cost. Behind her, footsteps crunched softly on the gravel path. She turned and saw a man standing near the gate, a young man in a dark coat, hands in his pockets. His face was familiar, Robert Vale's eyes, but gentler. He nodded once, not approaching. Then he lifted 2 fingers in a quiet salute and walked away. Asha didn't call out. She didn't need to. Some gestures spoke louder than words. She looked again at the rose, the 15th, alive among the dead. The sun's way of saying the vow still stood. The sun moved higher, scattering light across the marble. The old roses looked almost golden now, like history turning into lesson. Asha closed her eyes for a moment. The world felt still, the way it does just before rain, full of promise. Ah, grief. She stood, brushed the dirt from her hands, and whispered, "Some debts cannot be paid, only honored." Then she turned toward the gate, leaving behind the grave, the roses, and the quiet echo of a vow kept alive. The camera would have followed her until the light swallowed the path completely. White, endless, forgiving.